Hello everyone and welcome to Backyard Farmer. I'm Kim Todd and we've got another great show planned for you tonight as we take the next hour to answer your garden questions. We'd love to hear from you, so if you've got those questions and maybe a picture or two, send us an email to byf@unl.edu. Tell us as much as you can about that question, including where you live. And remember, although we can't get to everybody's question on the air, you can also search for those answers on our social media pages, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. As always, we start the show with samples. And Rock, you brought in a giant piece of crabby grass.
That's exactly right. And I bet you're wondering why I would bring in such a common grass. Go ahead, ask me.
I'm not going to ask you.
Oh, you're supposed to bite on that fish. Come on. Anyway, so this is crabgrass. I think most of you recognize it. And you're saying, well, we all know what that looks like. And, you go a lot of places and you see a lot of crabgrass. What I'm going to say, though, is that we normally recommend you let your clippings fall to the ground. But we're getting to that time of year where every one of these heads is going to produce a copious amount of seed. And if you let your clippings, once these dry out a little bit after the first frost or so, all that seed's going to be mature, and the mower just helps shatter it. And then you let your clippings fall. They're going to fall back to the surface. So you're essentially reseeding your yard with crabgrass, if you have significant crabgrass. Along the edge of your neighbor, if perhaps they don't treat, along sidewalks where they've got those hot spots. These are all locations that can be fairly high in crabgrass populations. So don't pick those clippings up, or at least blow them out to the sidewalk or the street and then sweep them up. Don't let them go down the drain, and just dispose of them that way, or else you're going to have way more seeds in the ground than you need. And pre-emergent herbicides work really well in the spring, but they're not 100%. So if you add another couple 100,000 seeds to your lawn and you only get 95% control, even with the best of herbicides, think about those 5% that you added to the number. So it's all a numbers game. So just realize you should be not letting these clippings fall back to the surface once these crabgrass plants start to brown out and the seed matures and it's ready to pop. So just keep that in mind.
And don't put them in the compost pile.
If you compost properly, the seed doesn't make it, but most people don't.
Exactly.
I know a certain camera person that says he doesn't compost them because of that reason.
Not mentioning names or anything.
Not mentioning Dan's name. That's exactly right.
All right, Lauren, what'd you bring?
Well, I got a good sample tonight. So we get a lot of questions on the show about a branch dying on a shrub or a tree. And so I brought a couple examples today this is a variegated viburnum in my yard. But the first one, this was a branch that was dying, and if you look down, we'll get the camera to kind of zoom up. This had a lot of just some winter feeding injury, you can see on there. And then after that, a lot of times that feeding injury gets infected. And so we'll have fungi colonize that, and then that'll usually kill the branch. So we always talk about, following that branch down and looking for some sort of injury. And then another piece of this, on the same shrub, I brought a really big sample tonight. So this was just kind of setting like this. And so I took this whole section was dead in the shrub. And if you take a look, there's a little hole right here. And so we talk a lot about borers. And so there was a little hole in here. And then I'm just gonna, you can see the little opening there. And then if we can pan over here, I just kind of took my table saw and cut it out so you can see the channel from the bore in there. So you can see how that would significantly weaken the branch. And this one had been killed earlier in the season. And then I took the base of it, and you can see again how more injury, when we open that up, you can see some more dark discoloration, and you can see the wound points where we had some injury. And again, just a lot of places for infection to occur. There's another little, right in there's a little borehole. But a lot of spaces for infection and killing that branch. So again, always just inspect those, go down to the base of them, see if you see any evidence of swelling. In this case, there was some swelling and some cracks in the bark, and just spaces where you could see injury, and those are always good to take out.
Excellent. Thanks, Lauren. All right, Elizabeth. Almost perfect sample because it's not quite flowering, but
it's starting to flower, and it's one of those that we want to be on the lookout for. So what it is it's the Seven Suns flower. Heptacodium is the genus with that one. This is one that's going to either be a large shrub or a small tree, going to get about 10 to 30 tall or so and about 6 to 15 wide. The cool part about this shrub is one of the later flowering shrubs that's out there. So it's starting to take off right now, and it's not hit full bloom yet. But when it does hit full bloom, it's going to be covered with, Kim said, painted lady butterflies. Right now there's a bunch of soldier beetles all over the shrub. The cool part about this is these white flowers then turn into the pink sepals, and the sepals really don't do anything. It's just a fancy horticultural term, but it goes to pink, and then the bark of this shrub is really cool and exfoliating and really adds some winter interest. So this is a shrub that has multiple seasons of interest. Now, the kicker, zones 5 to 9. So if you're in central Nebraska, we're rolling the dice if we want to try to do this. This is a full sun to part shade plant. So if we're going to try it out in central Nebraska, we need to make sure that we give it some kind of protection so that way it can survive that much longer. And there's some really nice ones on campus that are just really starting to take off right now.
Excellent. It's really a fun shrub, or tree, or shree, or trub. All right, Rock, you have 3 picture questions first, and it's weed night, so.
Here we go.
The first one is these very thorny plants that are vining and sharp, and we've had several of these this season.
Yeah, the common name is greenbrier. It's Similax. It's a viney. It actually has a hook thorn on it, so those hooks come up and attach, and so they can facilitate them getting up and down. Actually, because they're usually up in and among more ornamentals, that's kind of a problem. But the best thing you can do is trace them down. Be careful because they do have the spines on them, down to the base and about 3 to 4 inches off the ground. Cut them off there clean and immediately, and I don't mean 2 or 3 hours later, but immediately hit that with a combination of Roundup and a broadleaf herbicide of some kind. Spray them, paint it on with a paintbrush, whatever the case may be, and chances are you'll get better than 90% of them that won't grow back. If they start to grow back, catch them before they start vining again, but that's greenbrier.
All right, your next one is a Geneva viewer, and she thinks this is ground cherries, and she wants to know what she can do to get rid of them. So far, she's digging.
Yeah, ground cherry is a huge genus. There's of various ground cherries, and where I grew up, there were 7 or 8 that were problematic in crops and that sort of thing. It's a member of the nightsage family, which makes it akin to a lot of our more troublesome weeds, and also, interestingly enough, tomatoes. So I don't know specifically what this one is, but it does have all the characteristics of a ground cherry, and did they give a location?
Geneva.
No, but I mean in the garden.
In a berm.
Yeah, this is going to be, This is, once again, we go back to, my go-to is always glyphosate, and then when you've got a broadleaf that's difficult to control like this, that also has secondary woody growth, then hit it with a 2,4-D at the same time, or something, another broadleaf herbicide. If you can put them in the spray tank at the same time, you'll be better off. Make sure you don't use that spray tank for anything else but these kind of targeted things without rinsing first.
All right, and your third one is, what is this in the flower bed? And that's a little one. Pokeberry.
Pokeberry, yeah. I was remembering this one from earlier before. And so pokeberry is, every part of it is poisonous. They're not lethal, but those berries are really tempting to children. And they look like grapes, and they look like they'd be sweet, and children will often consume them. There's numerous cases on a year-to-year basis with pokeberry, so you want to get that out of there. And any of the earlier sprayer recommendations will work. They can be dug, but they too tend to be persistent. So
and large.
And large, yeah. So probably spraying them and burning them back, and then continuing to do so. But I would get that out of there, especially if there's any children around. But also understand that every part of that plant has bowel inflammatory things, which is not what we want.
All right. Okay, Lauren, it's shroom night.
Is that why Mom called it spring cleaning? Is that why?
Oh, no.
For poke greens?
All right, your first one, actually, you saw this earlier. This is a Mondayman, Iowa viewer who said, this is what you looked at before, and you said, send us some more pictures when it turns into something. So that first was August 4th, and then it was the 19th.
And I love the follow-up. That's great. It is not what I thought initially it was. So this is the conch of I don't know what genus and species it is even, but it's colonized the inside of the tree. So depending on what the whole tree looks like, it just indicates it's very weak, and it is it is something that should be considered. If it's at risk of being a hazard tree, they might want to remove it. So it's not edible that I can tell from this.
All right, and your next one is a Stromsburg viewer, says, is this growth on a tree? And she does think this is a hackberry in a local park. Is it a danger?
This is the same type of thing where you have, anytime you have those fruiting structures on the trunk, it indicates colonization inside and the heartwood of the tree is weakened. So in this case, I would put this as a tree that is most likely a hazard tree as well.
Immediate removal. And then your third one here is Omaha viewer. How do they get rid of this? And they want to do an organic thing to get rid of it, or will a hard freeze kill it? And so
there's a couple things. It looks like a slime mold to me.
It's dog barf slime mold.
And so, so this is something that you wouldn't have to worry too much about. You could take a hose and wash it away, and it would be fine. It may reoccur in the same area next year, but it's not something that I would worry too much about, and just take a hose and you can wash it away.
I can't believe that you didn't jump all over being able to say dog barf on camera. I love that name. You pathologists come up with the greatest name.
All right, Elizabeth, your first one here is a Bradshaw, Nebraska viewer. Is this tree dying, or does it just need to be trimmed, all of the leaves? And we have two pictures here. I think we have the leaves too. Several are completely dried up and the rest of the leaves are curled up. Can we do anything about this?
So the rolling of the leaves looks like it's a physiological condition similar to tomato leaf roll, where it's just so hot, it's losing on moisture, it's rolling up. The more concerning part is the death and dieback of that canopy.
Right.
I was talking to Lauren, we're looking at an elm. I don't have good outlook for it. I think eventually you're gonna have to remove that tree. Not 100% sure if we're looking at Dutch elm disease or something similar, but I don't think they're gonna be able to have this tree come back from that kind of damage.
All right, your next one is an Alliance viewer. It's a linden, about 15 years old. It's doing well, concerned about the black plastic. Several younger trees also have it. Pulled this away about 12 inches. Should it be further? If they pull it back, should they wait till spring? So it's all those questions about black plastic and mulch.
You know, black plastic is one of those where if you leave it on there, it's going to girdle the tree because the tree's going to grow into it. So if it was me, I would try to take as much of that away from the trunk of the tree as you possibly can. Is it going to be feasible to do it in the entire landscape bed? Probably not going to be the most fun job you've ever done, but if you can do it, it's going to be recommended, because then that's going to allow water to infiltrate down, meaning that tree is going to get more moisture that's going to absorb into it. It's up to you. I would do it whenever you get a chance. Maybe if we get a cool next week when it's going to be cooler, maybe I'd consider it then, and then you can always put more mulch over the top then next spring and refresh the bed.
All right, and your next one is an Omaha viewer. I said the top of this, this is a red sunset maple, hasn't had any foliage for a few years. They're wondering, is this a girdling root? Do they have the tree removed, or what do we think we're going to do here on this one?
I think based on the shape of the tree, it looks like possibly the central leader could have broken out or had damage at some point in time. I'm seeing a little bit of a flare at the bottom, which is a good indication. If it was a flat spot or went in like a telephone pole in the ground, we know it'd have a root issue. Unfortunately, there's no good way to fix it, and it's always probably going to look a little wonky. If they don't like the shape or the way that it looks, you could try to get it kind of shaped up, but unfortunately that one side is just going to be the central leader and it's going to take over. So it's not going to be an easy fix.
All right, thank you, Elizabeth. Well, in many parts of Nebraska, there are drought conditions, and it is extremely important that your landscape trees and shrubs are getting the proper amount of water this time of year as we head into the fall. Let's take a few minutes to hear from Elizabeth about good fall watering practices.
Kearney, Nebraska at Yanni Park. If you remember last year at this time, this park was underwater and it was flooded. This year, we're on the opposite end of the extreme and we're actually in drought conditions right now. So we have several different plants in this planting bed. We have several different perennials and we have annuals. We need to remember that both of these plants are going to need more moisture, especially where in droughty conditions. The annuals, we're not so concerned about because they can be replaced again next year. But it's the perennials that really are going to need supplemental irrigation, as well as some of the shrubs that are going to need supplemental irrigation. In the absence of rain, we need to make sure that these plants get about an inch of supplemental moisture a week. So we need to make sure that we apply it low. We don't want to try to get it on the foliage if we can avoid it, because that's going to add additional disease pressures and we're going to have problems down the line. Now would be a perfect time to go out and look at your landscape. Double check to make sure all your sprinkler heads are working, especially those drip irrigation in those landscape beds. If your drip irrigation system isn't working, or if your overhead sprinklers are not hitting the bed, now might be a good time to go ahead and apply supplemental water with a hose or with a sprinkler in that area. When it comes to trees, we need to make sure that these long-term investments also get the adequate moisture that they need. So when we look at newly planted trees, a good rule of thumb is going to be a gallon of water per inch of diameter every day for 2 weeks, and then every other day for 2 weeks. When it comes to more established, mature trees, we need to make sure that these trees receive moisture in the absence of rain. And there's several ways that you can do that. You can do it by either using your landscape bed irrigation system, you could do your lawn irrigation system with the sprinkler head, or you could use different irrigator bags where you fill it up and it slowly drips the amount of moisture that that tree is going to need. So you're not out there with a bucket putting a bunch of water down. Whatever method that you use, you need to make sure that you get at least the top 8 inches of the soil moist, because a majority of the tree's root systems are in the top 8 to 18 inches of the soil. We don't need to apply too much water because then it's going to be out of the soil profile and the tree's not going to be able to access it. And we need to make sure we apply it slowly so that way the tree has the possibility to pull it up through its root system. Now is a perfect time to be preparing your landscape for fall. Make sure that all your trees and shrubs and landscape beds are getting enough supplemental irrigation so that way the plants can go throughout fall and winter in a much better state.
We get so excited to get out in the spring and get all those plants going that by the time the season is declining, so are we. We forget to water some of our plants. So it is a great time for you to do some of that scouting, check the weather, and water those plants. All right, turf questions. Rock, the first is an Elkhorn viewer. She sent us 2 pictures and she wants to know if it's poison ivy.
Okay, this is box elder here. Which is a tree, and this looks like a seedling. And I mean, it does have some of the characteristics, you know, leaves of 3, let it be is the old moniker for. But this is not. This is not. Poison ivy. Thank you. This is box elder. So you kind of caught me off guard there because I was. But it's interesting to know it has 3 leaves. So that's don't always use the 3 leaf as your deterrent, but be careful of those plants that do have 3 leaves.
And your second picture is
ta-da!
poison ivy.
This is definitely poison ivy. And, you know, everyone uses that leaves of 3 thing, but what I like to do is that when you have non-uniform notches along the leaf margin, that's definitely poison ivy. And I remember the name this time, so I don't get the grimace from you. Thank you. But yeah, the little notches that you can see on that big leaf right in the front, you know, they're not regular. They're not like they were on the box elder, which has notches, but it's not similar to this sort of irregular, not necessarily opposite ends of the leaf. That kind of it's kind of random. And you'll also know that the growth environments, box elders tend to grow pretty much anywhere, but you usually see poison ivy in the darkest, most shaded areas, and it's viney versus once that box elder got much bigger, it would be growing a straight stem, much like most of the trees do, unless for some reason it got cut. If they want to control poison ivy, there are a number of poison ivy products in the market that are available at your garden store. Unfortunately, it's often in and among your trees, so just be careful when you're spraying these products that you don't cause non-target injury to the plants that you want to keep.
All right, and your next one is please identify this vining weed. Roundup is not super effective. How do they kill it before it takes over the entire universe?
Yeah, this is field bindweed, and it's going to be sort of a lifelong obsession. Unfortunately, this weed produces a lot of seed. When you see those trumpet-shaped white and sometimes even kind of pretty pink flowers on it, But there are products out there that work relatively well on this. Roundup, like the viewer indicated, is not very effective, but there's a product called quinclorac, which we've mentioned for crabgrass control. It's probably the hottest consumer-based herbicide I know for ground ivy, and just be persistent in your spraying and spray multiple times.
Excellent. Thank you so much. All right, lilacs with issues. Lauren, we had many people again. The first one, handful of lilacs dropping their leaves. Possible they're going dormant because of the cold snap. Then we had another one that was in Hampton that is growing discoloration on few of the shrubs, 4-year-old shrub. Others are showing the same thing, mostly smaller and younger. So, and then we had, in the last few weeks, perfectly healthy lilacs have turned white. So I think we have 1, 2, 3 pictures here in sequence if you want to take a look at them and see what we've got.
Beautiful. So this one is the powdery mildew. That's very common in lilac, particularly once you get into August and beyond in most of our lilacs. This is a more severe case of that. It will result in the leaves drying and wilting and defoliating. The other one, it looked like it may be, there's a bacterial leaf spot on lilac also, and I believe that's what the first one was. Really, with all of these, the only thing I would recommend is to avoid overhead irrigation for this particular case. And I wouldn't really recommend a fungicide for the powdery mildews. They're going to get that. You can use sulfur if you choose to. Earlier in the season, don't do anything at this point, though.
Right, and
Just enjoy the beautiful fungus and get a microscope, and you could really enjoy it.
And don't prune off those buds, or you won't have flowers next
That's
spring.
a good point. People do want to cut them off.
All right, Elizabeth. This viewer saw this at the Southeast Nebraska Cancer Garden in Humboldt. She says, is it a small yellow eggplant, or what is it really?
So there's several different cultivars of eggplant. There is a little yellow one. It's more of an heirloom. It's kind of hard to come by. What I believe this one is a little tiny white one. Kind of looks like an egg. And if you let eggplant go too long, it will start to turn yellow. So I think that's what happened, or we have some reflected heat issues from the concrete underneath it.
All right. Then we have what is this plant? It comes up every year in front of their home in a city that shall remain nameless because of what this plant is.
Right, because of what this plant is. What this plant is probably purple loosestrife or some of the lithrums. The thing with that is it is a noxious weed and it needs to be controlled. So we will not tell the weed authority where you are at, and you can go ahead and remove it safely. It might be very difficult to try to get rid of. It has lots of little tiny seeds on it, so I'd try to get it out of there before those seeds mature.
And if anybody wants to know what it really looks like, it's all along the rivers.
It is along the rivers. It's
Yeah.
gorgeous, but no, we can't grow it.
And then we have any idea what this is. It just grew on an acreage northwest of Malcolm.
So that is a turtle head. It's a type of perennial plant, and it is one of the native ones when we have the white color. There we go. The white color is the native. The pink color is a cultivar. So that one is a turtle head.
Excellent. And then finally, this is in Concord, Nebraska. Please identify this volunteer tree. She thinks it's an elm. She wonders whether it can be transplanted or is it destined for certain death before it gets bigger and damages the fence. What do we think?
So that is not an elm. We're thinking that's possibly a tree of heaven. Tree of heaven can be a weedy species and it can be very aggressive. And so that choice is up to you if you think you have a location where that tree would thrive. However, I would probably lean towards the side of removing it and using one of Rock's cut stump treatments where you dab the stem immediately with a glyphosate and broadleaf weed killer product, just to make sure you don't spread it along the neighborhood.
Excellent. Thank you, Elizabeth. Well, we have had another bumper crop of vegetables out at our garden this year. We're really proud to donate what we grow to local companies and to local food organizations and food banks that need it. So here's Terry James out at the Backyard Farmer Garden to tell us more.
This week in the Backyard Farmer Garden, we're continuing picking all of our produce. We're up to almost 500 pounds this season that's going to local food banks and pantries in the East Campus area. So we're super excited about our produce totals. We're also, remember, this is fall. We're looking at what worked, what didn't work, and taking notes. All of our cool crop seasons that we planted a few weeks ago are looking fantastic. We talked about how quickly they grow this time of year, and we are really seeing that happen. We're also preparing for some cold weather that's going to be coming down out of Canada next week. So make sure that you watch your weather closely, because you may need to go out and cover some of your tender vegetables and flowers to protect them because of this cold weather. So stop by the Backyard Farmer Garden and check it out.
Right now, it is time for the lightning round. Elizabeth, are you ready?
I'm ready to win.
More than one viewer, but this one from Hastings said, when should you split and divide rhubarb?
Rhubarb, I like to recommend you do it in the spring as it's starting to come up, because then you don't have to worry about trying to keep those leaves alive as we get through fall.
All right, we have a York viewer who wonders whether eggshells on the garden will provide enough calcium for tomatoes to help with blossom end rot.
Probably not.
All right, green tomatoes are not ripening. Why not?
Tomatoes have been taking a very long time to ripen right now. Just give it some time. Hope that you don't get the cold temperatures and they'll start to turn colors.
All right, this viewer is moving and wants to take peonies and lilacs and has to do it now. Can they overwinter them in their garage, or should they sink the pots in the garden? They're going to Wisconsin.
Well, yeah, do it now, because you really don't have another option. It's going to be fairly difficult to overwinter in the garage, just because it needs to make sure it maintains a certain temperature. So I'd try to sink the pots into the ground, so that way the root ball doesn't freeze, and then put it where it wants to go in the spring.
All right, nice job. Ending right on time. Okay, you ready, Lauren?
I'm ready.
No lunch meat or anything?
Just ready.
Okay, we have a Crete viewer who has peonies in a shade-covered area, and they are covered with white stuff. What is that, and what to do about it?
Peonies, cover with powdery mildew, don't worry about it.
Okay. This is a Papillion viewer who wonders whether there are some sprays for the fungus, that is the crown rot kind of fungus in the soil, that will keep that from returning.
Unfortunately not. The only thing you could do is you could try like long-term solarization to reduce the pathogen load in the soil.
All right. This is a Council Bluffs viewer who wonders why some of the varieties of tomatoes get all those diseases and others do not.
Just amazing. It's genetics.
All right.
It's resistance.
We have a Ralston viewer who has Viking red potatoes, and they've been scabby with bad parts for 2 or 3 years. Is there any way to manage this, or a different variety better?
Now, unfortunately, you could do variety selection and try to select one that's more scab resistant. Rotation out of potatoes for a couple of years would help as well.
All right.
Or to a
Also
different spot.
nice job. Also right on time. Did you hear that?
I can't go more than a minute. I don't know why being on time when you only get a minute makes sense.
All you got to do is answer 5 questions, Rock, and you win.
I'm going to answer 4 and be happy.
All right. We have a viewer who wants to know where to send soil samples for pH and nitrogen and fusarium wilt.
The fusarium wilt would have to go to the diagnostic clinic. We no longer have a soil test lab, so Ward Labs or Harris Labs both do soil samples.
All right. This is a home with underground sprinklers. They just moved in. They want to know how often and when to water.
Whenever the turf needs it, and I don't mean to be snarky, but you wait until the turf needs it. Don't use an automatic system, set it and forget it. You want to get that, make sure it's operating efficiently, and then take the time to pay attention to your lawn and see when it needs it.
All right.
Usually about 1 inch to 1.5 inches a week.
Okay. This is a 7-year-old lawn. Does it need to be power raked?
Is it bluegrass or fescue?
They didn't say.
If it's bluegrass, maybe. If it's fescue, definitely not.
All right. Underwood, Iowa viewer will have people parking on their rock-solid dry lawn since they haven't had water since May. Should they water it and try to bring it back before they park, or wait until after the wheels?
I'm going to say put the wheels on it and then overseed.
Yeah, better idea. All right. Also nice job. Look at this, the 3-way tie. Elizabeth.
That's the best way to do it.
Right. Plants of the week.
So we've got some really nice plants of the week, and I know we talked about turtlehead earlier, and we talked about the native one that was white, but this is one called Hot Lips. and it is pink. This is a really tall plant, 30 inches tall or more. It's a reliable fall bloomer. It's blooming right now, obviously. It likes part shade. It rarely has many insect problems. This is one that if you have that damp spot in your landscape, this one will appreciate that extra moisture in that location. It's not gonna demand it that it has to have extra moisture, but it will appreciate it. The other one that we have are going to be the purple ones that are in here, the bottle gentian. This is a native plant, and it's also a good fall bloomer. Sometimes it can be difficult to find and or difficult to establish. So if you see it, let it be. It's a super fun one because what happens is the little bee gets into that little nook right in there and pulls those petals apart and then gets in there and ruffles around and then comes out. But this one likes part shade, 24 to 30 inches tall, and just some really nice, good fall blooming flowers right now.
And those are both in the Backyard Farmer Garden. We want to say thanks to John and Carol Morganson for that bottle gentian. So, all right, next set of questions, Rock. This is a Trainer, Iowa viewer. She's calling this a poinsettia type plant. Came up in the landscape, poinsettia looking leaves, bell-shaped flowers, white with a bit of purple. They form a ball type fruit and they've got thorns.
Yeah, this is buffalo burr. If it's in the landscape, very difficult to control, primarily because you've got the other broadleaf plants in there. So spot spraying or using the glove of death would be the best way to go about it.
All right. Then
Yeah, you definitely want to get rid of this one.
Right, no kidding. Then we have a viewer in Culbertson. She has a couple of handfuls of weeds that she chopped out of her asparagus and iris, and she wants to know what they are and how to get rid of them.
This is 4 o'clock. You got to love the name because it flowers at 4 o'clock, from 4 to 8 roughly. But the unfortunate thing is that it's perennial in 7 to 10, but it's an annual here, and it produces a copious amount of seeds. So I'm going to suggest that those beds use the vegetable preen next spring. And it was asparagus and iris, right? Mm-hmm. And right. Because you've got asparagus, you got to use the vegetable blade, but it will work in the iris bed. And make sure to put on at least 2 applications in the spring. Should take care of those seeds. Excellent. And your next viewer found this is in the raised bed, and it's more plant than raised bed. She wonders what this is. So I had to look at this one multiple times, and there is a plant called bitter lettuce. It's in the lettuce family. I got the scientific name Lactuca virosa. It's also known as opium lettuce because it has some medicinal properties, but it can be 8 feet tall. And I'm not positive it's that because I didn't see flowers or the typical, but I think that's bitter lettuce, and not bitter lettuce because it's been in the refrigerator too long, but bitter as in the word. I'm just intrigued with that plant, and I would love if they would send back a picture of the flower on it, and then we could confirm that, because I can't say I have ever seen that anywhere. Interesting. Yeah, that would be good if they can send a picture of it. All right, Lauren, you had a viburnum that was dead. This is a viewer that has, this is arrowwood viburnum, and this is the plant itself. I think you can see the dead in it. It's got spots on the leaves, so showing the leaves themselves for another picture. He's afraid it is maybe spreading to the viburnums on the other side and wondering what he can do to save it.
I'm really wondering if it's the same thing. I mean, because you've got a large portion of the plant that's affected, and it could be something like I showed earlier. So I would really carefully inspect those branches and follow them down like we talked about. This could be even the type of symptoms you see there with the brown margins and things can be the result of stress, just even if there is something on the main leaders. So give it a careful inspection, and I would also remove any of the dead material to try to protect that too, if it is a disease that would spread. All right, then we have a viewer in Papillion that has 3 hydrangeas that have these brown spots and some little white spots on the leaves. They were planted in June. Yeah, so this one in particular, I think it's just the rocks. I'm going to not go down the disease trail on this, even though it looks like leaf spots and things that we could go down. So they're not going to do too well under that condition where that rock is reflecting so much heat and everything. Right. So you might want to consider trying to put some mulch around those. Right, exactly. All right, thank you, Lauren. Non-rock mulch. Non-rock mulch, exactly.
Elizabeth, this is an Omaha viewer. They had an early snowstorm. One side of this hydrangea got weighed down, totally misshapen. She's wondering, can it be pruned back into more of a rounded shape, and if so, when?
So with that, you should be able to go ahead and prune that back. Right now is not the ideal time. Most of the time with those bloomers, we want to make sure that we do that after they get done flowering. I think it's gonna be difficult to get that rounded shape where that center part is gonna be so much taller. I mean, you could try, I just don't think it's gonna have that perfect rounded shape is what you're looking for.
All right. Then we had a viewer, and I think this is coming not just from this one, but from many others. This is a starry night rose mallow. This is hardy hibiscus. They can't figure out what's going on with it. It looked like this, and then our next picture looks like this. They think this is no flowers. Something has happened to the flower buds that have turned green like this. What's going on?
So what has happened is we are watching the plant go ahead and setting a seed pod. The buds are really tight and twisted, and then when the flower opens up, it has that giant hibiscus flower, and then it's followed by that capsule. And so what we're seeing in those green bracts is actually the capsule from the hibiscus flower.
Right. No more buds.
No
Time
more
to shut her
buds.
down for the winter.
It's done blooming. Sometimes they will seed themselves, but no need to really prune those off.
All right, thank you, Elizabeth. Well, our ornamental pear trees are really taking a beating this year, as most of them are turning orange. If you look close, you'll see something similar to cedar apple rust. Pear rust has really been rampant this year, and to help us get an idea of how we can possibly control it, here's Kyle to tell us more.
We've been getting a lot of phone calls this year about pear trees that almost look like they've just been spray painted orange. Just all these orange dots kind of encompassing the entire tree. Well, this is pear rust, very common this year. Pear rust is caused by a fungal pathogen, one of our gymnosporangium rusts. This is very closely related to cedar apple rust, but it is a different species. What pear rust does is in the spring, you'll start to see these orange globs that are forming on a juniper or also a cedar tree. And then as these orange globs mature, those spores from those globs will be splashed via rain or wind blown onto neighboring pear trees. So one thing that we talk about with controlling pear rust is sanitation. So making sure that we are picking up the fallen leaves at the end of the year that have all of these bright orange spots on them. And as we can see on the underside of these leaves, we have the acea that are formed in these long tubes. And these spores will then blow onto a cedar tree and cause infection next spring. Another control method is making sure that we are removing that alternate host. So if we have a lot of pear trees that we're concerned about, maybe we could think about removing those junipers or the cedar trees in the vicinity. Unfortunately, research has shown that these spores can blow up to 14 miles. So unless you're able to remove every juniper or every cedar within 14-mile radius, that's kind of out of the question. So fungicides are going to be our best management if we are looking for some sort of chemical control. If we can't stand these orange blobs on the pear tree. Now generally it's not going to cause serious problems to the pear tree. It's mainly cosmetic. However, if we do have severe infestation year after year and we get early leaf drop, then that can decrease the overall vigor of the tree. But in most situations, this is a disease that we say is just fine to let it be and just kind of almost try to enjoy those spray painted orange leaves if you can. But if you can't, and if you are thinking about some sort of fungicide application, once we start to see spots on the leaves, it's too late for any sort of fungicidal control. So we want to be applying that fungicide to the pear trees early in the spring when we're seeing those globs or those galls that are forming on the junipers or on the cedar trees. And once we're seeing those orange globs, that's when we want to go and find our pear trees and apply a product such as myclobutanol that has very good control against pear rust.
As Kyle said, if you have a mild case, it really doesn't do much damage to your tree. Sanitation, as we always say, will go a long ways to keeping those pear trees at least a little greener next season. All right, here we go with more questions. Rock, this sprouted up next to the driveway. He thinks it looks like a volunteer verbena, so he let it grow. Although it doesn't really demonstrate the showy flower, it does seem to resemble it. Is this verbena?
Yeah, this is verbena, interestingly enough, and I think we have another picture.
Yep, there you go.
That's verbena, and it's got a little bit of, but normally this is a little showier, but it is a reseeder. It's a prolific seeder, so it can regrow from seed that it produced the previous year, and once it got established, they let it go. But it can be pretty rangy, and I'm going to suggest they eradicate it or transplant it somewhere else. It can take over a garden relatively quickly, and there are better, prettier, more cultivated varieties of plant to put in your garden. So it's verbena.
All right, and then this, any idea what this one is? It grew on an acreage northwest of Malcolm, and we did not have a close-up on this one.
I think this is boneset, which is a native perennial. It's a really good pollinator plant. I'm not sure how invasive this plant is, so I'm not sure if it's one that you want to eradicate or not. I'm looking at.
I think it's fine.
I think it's good. It's good.
So leave it be.
Leave it be.
Don't rogue that one out.
No roguing. All right, thank you, Rock. Lauren, we have, this is an Omaha viewer. They want to know whether this next one is hollyhock insects or a bacteria. They all got attacked by this, and clearly seriously attacked.
Beautiful case of hollyhock rust.
Yeah.
So that is a fungus, and if you grow hollyhocks, pretty much in Nebraska, I think you will see that.
All right.
You can use a fungicide earlier to control it.
Way earlier, right?
Way earlier.
Spring.
Don't do anything now.
All right. Your next one is also an Omaha viewer. He's been seeing a lot of these shrooms, and they do have a dog, and they do not want the dog to mow down on these. So what are they, and how do you get rid of them?
I believe this is some sort of bolete, and I can't tell for sure from the picture if it's around pines this time of year. There's a lot usually that show up around pine trees. But
I think that's just turf.
Just turf under,
yeah.
Is it coming out of the turf? But regardless of the mushroom, I think if you have pets, I would really recommend removing them from your yard, because you really don't know what that reaction is, and many of these different species will react, even with people, differently. So the best caution to do is to just remove them.
All right, excellent. Elizabeth, your first viewer here is in Gothenburg, and they're in the process of actually moving further west to the Panhandle. 32 acres of pasture. They want to transplant some yucca from the roadside into their yard. What do they need to do? And this, of course, is our native small soapweed.
So the first thing is we can't recommend that they remove them from the road ditch. However, if they remove them from the pasture, that is fine. They're going to produce some pups or some little tiny ones off to the side. If you're going to attempt to move them, try to move the smallest one that you possibly can. Yucca has a very extensive root system, and it's not going to be easy to move one of those big ones. You can also purchase them at a nursery, and so that might be another route to go, is instead of digging a whole bunch of that up, just go and purchase some more ornamental ones.
And it's so interesting. It's so hard to transplant, and it's so hard to kill.
It is very hard to kill. You're going to try to kill it, and it's
I'm
not
glad
going to
that's
die.
not that wasn't the question.
All right, your next one is, they're calling it a golden catalpa. I think maybe it's just a catalpa, but they want to transplant it. They want to know when is the best time, and if they want to grow it as a clump, how do they turn it into one?
So now is the perfect time to go ahead, dig it up, not like in the 100-degree days that are coming, but the following week. Go ahead, dig it up, try to take as much root ball as you possibly can. The hard part with turning it into a clump when you have a single leader at this point in time, you could cut it off. It depends on what the tree's going to do. If it's going to sprout epicormic sprouts around there, and you're going to have weakly attached ones, you could give it a try. I don't know if it's going to be strongly attached if you cut it off like near the ground level and have it come back from the base. That's always the concern, is as it continues to grow and get bigger, if we get an ice storm or a wind event, that it could be weakly attached and just break open.
All right, and the third one here is a maple that came up in a flower pot, has a couple more in a flower bed. They want to know when to transplant, and can they be transplanted?
Go ahead and do it now. September is an ideal time to go ahead and plant trees. Just make sure you have adequate amount of moisture. So that guy is probably going to be less than an inch in diameter, so a gallon of water a day for 2 weeks. Every day, and then every other day for 2 weeks, and then about an inch of water a week with that. But you can't really overwater a newly transplanted tree. Just make sure that you put it down, especially if you're going to do it when it's somewhat warm out.
Excellent. Thank you, Elizabeth. Well, we have a few announcements of things in the gardening world as we wrap up. Our first one still is the Bug Squad special exhibit at the Omaha Children's Museum on the 5th. URL on the screen on that one. Our next one up is the Grow Big Red virtual learning series is still continuing. This is tree care. You can see the registration, go.unl.edu/growbigredvirtual every Tuesday through September. And our third one is the Digging Deeper with Backyard Farmer. You can watch us on Facebook Thursdays at 8 o'clock Central. Follow us on Backyard Farmer and NET Nebraska if you really want to see us dig deeper into those subjects. And that's been fun this season. We probably are not going to do that for the rest of the season, but we will maybe pick up and do that again next year. We have lots of good subject matter that needs more than that lightning round or that 3 minutes worth to be able to get it done. So.